Okay, folks, let's do this. My name is David Parsons, and this is Nostalgia Trap. I am very excited to present this conversation with my guest today, David Rensin. He is the author of 13 books, 5 of them New York Times bestsellers, and I was lucky enough to encounter him through my work at the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute here in Ventura, California. Sitting in one of my classes on the history of the automobile was this best-selling author. And he approached me after class one day and handed me a copy of his book, All for a Few Perfect Waves, The Audacious Life and Legend of Rebel Surfer Miki Dora. And that book, honestly, has blown my mind for a number of different reasons, and we get into those in this conversation. But honestly, David just has a really incredible history as a writer for Rolling Stone and Playboy magazine in the 1960s, 70s, 80s. He ends up writing books with Tim Allen, Jeff Foxworthy, Chris Rock, a whole bunch of comedians. And he's also written this book, Devil at My Heels, which is a book about the World War II hero Louis Zamperini. I just want to mention one other book, because I think it's an important one of his, is called The Mailroom, Hollywood History from the Bottom Up. He has a take on 20th century American culture that's sort of a lived experience of encountering all of these major cultural figures. So I just really enjoy the opportunity to sit down with David and talk with him about Miki Dora and his whole history. And I hope to have him back on the show to talk more because David has endless stories, honestly. And it's fun just to talk with him. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. I wanted to alert you, if you are not a subscriber to our Patreon, you are missing out on my daily news trap freak outs, where I flip through the screenshots of excerpts from notable publications around the world, often sent to me by my good friend Justin Rogers Cooper, and I feel like we are co-curators of the daily news trap updates. But I've just really been enjoying everyone's comments and ideas you're sharing on the Patreon page. If you're not part of that, come join us. It's really helping me out to realize that there are others who are on the same wavelength and looking at what's going on globally. So come on over and check that out. The link to the Patreon page is in the episode description. And please enjoy this conversation with David Rensin.
20th Century Man, is that on Steely Dan's Gaucho?
Yeah, I think so. Right. It's one of those.
One of those. It's
Yeah.
a different title.
Those are some 20th Century Men.
Yes.
I don't know if you've read Donald Fagen's book. It's up there somewhere. It's called Eminent Hipsters.
I haven't, but
so good.
I did see them in their prime in Santa Monica Civic Auditorium. Do you ever see that clip where there's a guy comes out and goes, "Mr. Steely Dan, here it is." It's really great.
No.
And it's just this guy comes out and says, like he's drunk, and this is a wonderful thing, the greatest thing. So here he is now, Mr. Steely Dan. It's
Mr.
great.
Steely Dan.
It's fantastic.
That's like Mr. Hootie and the Blowfish.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess so. I'm born in 1950, so I guess I encountered, and I was born in 1950, and to take a big jump, I will say that my high school goal after high school, because they ask you, what do you want to do? I say, I don't want to have a job.
Yeah.
I don't want to go to the office. Okay. So I managed to have a life that I was in offices and certainly, had to work, but I succeeded.
Why do you think you said that was your answer? Like, I don't want to go to the office. What influenced you to say that?
I hate being told what to do. I was glad to be 4F because I'm literally blind, so I didn't have to stand and go, "Yes, sir," Although when I took karate with my son, and you had to go, "Yes," that was okay. But
right.
years later, but I wanted to do what I wanted to do. I mean, I just
I want to kind of like growing up. Okay, so growing up in the Cold War, does that have something to do with this? I mean, because it's like you mentioned being 4F. That I imagine that's Vietnam, right?
Yeah, Vietnam. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. When does the Vietnam War enter your consciousness? It seems like
I don't know. When I was 18 in 1968,
mm-hmm.
Had to register for the draft.
Yeah.
But
by 68, it was already rolling. I mean,
yeah.
the society itself was.
I had a friend who was number 1 in the draft. Mm. I thought for years he was dead, but it turns out he survived.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know. I just have an inherent aversion to being told what to do. I want to carve my own life. Mm-hmm. And by the way, I didn't have any plans. Yeah. I never made a 5-year plan, or I want this or I want that. I mean, I've done a lot of different writing, a lot of different things, and just rolled from one thing to the next.
Well, I mean, I think that's one of the primary reasons I wanted to speak with you is because you've spent most of your life as a writer. When did writing enter your world?
Well, if you leave out the bad poetry I wrote to girls in high school.
Don't leave that out. Publish that eventually.
Yeah. When did writing... I don't know. I guess when I was in college at Cal State Northridge, which was San Fernando Valley State College at the time, I was a political science major, and that was very interesting to me. I wanted to be a doctor, but I did not like getting up for an 8 a.m. class in biology. So... And then I had some friends who worked at the school newspaper. So I hung out with them, and I just found a home. And, eventually I got to review Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, December 12th, 1969 at Pauley Pavilion. My first published article, name spelled wrong. It doesn't say David Rensin. And I just went from there. I mean, at that time in the late 60s, you want to meet the opposite sex or the other sex, so the opposite. You want to go to music for free. Mm-hmm. You want to be cool. My hair was down past my shoulders. And it just was fun.
How much of it felt like rebellion to you? Because I mean, that's the story, right? Is that like all the long-haired kids in the late 60s were rebels, but it sounds like you were just kind of like doing your thing.
Yeah, I didn't feel like I was rebelling.
Were your parents okay with this?
Well, yeah, sure. My dad would always wake me up in the morning, say, "It's 6:00. Get up, get a job." I go, "Why were you out till 2 a.m?" I said, "I was at the Troubadour. I was networking with people in the music business, and I'm trying to. That's how you do it." But my brother sold Fuller brushes for a while, so my father thought I could do that.
Are you serious? I swear to God, the Fuller brush thing has come up so many times with your specific generation of people on this show. They're like, "Oh yeah, Fuller brush." Yeah. Was that just an opportunity that you driving Uber or something? You could just do it if you wanted to?
Yeah, because you invested in yourself. I also sold encyclopedias door to door.
Yeah, that one too.
And the only good thing that came out of that was that I was in North Hollywood and knocked on a door, and the person who answered was Sky Saxon from the Seeds.
Nice. A music connection.
So they had some fun with me, and I had some fun.
Well, I want to talk about the fun because, I don't know if you've seen the movie High Fidelity with John Cusack.
I many times.
Yeah, Record Store movie. Really love that movie. And love the book, too.
No, the writer.
Nick Hornby.
Well, that... But
and the writer of the movie.
Movie writer, yeah.
You know everybody, man. I think we could just spend the time, like David Rensin drops names of people he's been in the same room with, would be a fun podcast.
Yeah, but actually I would call it wherever it was at, I wasn't there.
Well, why I brought up High Fidelity is because there's a moment in that story where his girlfriend tells him you need to make a list of what would be your 5 ideal jobs,
right? And
they're all jobs from history. It would be he's like, I would be a writer for Cream magazine in the late 60s until 72, and she laments that he is fantasizing about things that are impossible as a job. But you had that job a little bit, I feel like you were in that world that he is longing for, and that people like me that didn't get to experience it are like, wow. Well, music writer, Rolling Stone, Playboy, all that stuff sounds incredible.
I mean, I wrote for my college newspaper, and after a while, I put some clips together and sent them to Rolling Stone. And at the time, Rolling Stone had 3 inserts in the magazine, in the paper, New York, San Francisco, and L.A. called The Flyer. Mm. So I wrote a couple of stories for The Flyer, and eventually they thought I could write. And so I did my first story for Rolling Stone, and then it was on and off, back and forth for years.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they would, let freelancers work. Sometimes they'd say, well, no more freelancers. So, I had friends who wrote for Rolling Stone. I mean, I could name drop Cameron Crowe, who was a good friend of mine.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually just spread out to, Cream Magazine and Music World and Zoo World.
Were you the inspiration for the guy in Almost Famous, now that I'm thinking about Cameron
No.
Crowe? But that movie he made is about this world.
It is.
The whole Lester Bangs, right?
Lester. I spent an afternoon with Lester in his hotel room drinking rum in Kingston, Jamaica.
Wow.
We were all there in '76 to interview Bob Marley. A bunch of us, a guy from Time, Lester Bangs. I went from, believe it or not, Swank magazine because I had to get an assignment somewhere. And so in his little story, I'm Mr. Swank. But we just, we were shuttled around to different places, finally interviewed Marley sitting on top of his BMW, which was Bob Marley and the Wailers, of course.
Wow.
Surrounded by his buddies smoking spliffs, and we went all over Jamaica. It was great. But I mean, so that's my interaction with Lester. Although
did you interview Marley as a panel, or how does that work when there's a whole bunch of journalists?
We just asked questions.
Yeah.
And just in turn, and his guys would go, talk about the Bible, talk about Jah.
Mm-hmm.
So it was fun. It was fun.
How was Marley in '76? What was he like?
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I wish you could capture my look, which is like, I'm cool.
Yeah.
And I'm serious. Sober, romantic. So
he's a figure that I feel like had such potential to be a more powerful, transformative figure than he became because he died.
Yeah.
Well, so, I mean, like I put him in there with like all the tragedies of the '60s in a lot of ways.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, I wrote these magazine stories, and then I did a couple little tiny record reviews for Playboy, and then I started working for We magazine, OUI, the Playboy, secondary magazine. Interviewed Brian Wilson and did a lot of stories. And actually, one of my stories was on Penny Lane and the Flying Garter Girls, which turned out to be Penny Lane and the Whatever and Almost Famous.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because we all knew each other.
Yeah.
And yeah, your question was about, no, I wasn't the guy, but let's just say that there's a number of us who were standing just outside not actually standing there, but we were part of it. We knew it, Damone, the guy, you just got to have the attitude. The attitude was something that really happened until it was great, until the attitude didn't help anymore. Penny Lane is a great gal. The real Penny Lane. Doesn't look like Goldie Hawn, but
yeah, I was like, this is the Kate Hudson character, right?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that was the era exactly. Bands at the Riot House, the Hyatt House on Sunset Strip, throwing shit off the balconies. I mean, like I said, I was there, but I wasn't in the absolute center of things for sure.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it feels like that part of the romance of that era, and the like romance about the music journalists of that era, is that they were in on the action or they were there, right? They were partying with these guys. They partied with Led Zeppelin, and then they end up writing this crazy story in Rolling Stone about it.
Yeah. I mean, my friend Neil Preston, a photographer, did some incredible photos of Led Zeppelin and Queen, and there's published books, based on it. And I don't know. I mean, it seems great to me to have been there, but I don't make a big deal out of it. I was there. That was my life, you know? I mean, I wasn't a superstar in any, way. But eventually, my editor at We magazine went to Playboy, and I started a 30-year, contributing editorship where I did a lot of interviews, the big interviews, everybody from Bill Gates to Martin Scorsese to Cindy Crawford to Shirley MacLaine to Brian Gumbel to Jerry Seinfeld, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And those are the big interviews.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's the smaller ones, 20 questions. I probably did 100 of those. And I have a list, but it would take up all our time to read it. So
amazing.
So, I mean, it's amazing to me when I saw this list yesterday that I have on my website, my amateurish website, of all the people I interviewed.
It's like everybody.
Well,
It sounds like, I mean, you're just listing the biggest luminaries, but it's also like a Playboy interview, and most of this is for Playboy, right?
yeah.
There's a particular like style or a kind of goal of a Playboy interview. I feel like it's different. Like the famous there are famous Playboy interviews. I'm thinking of the one with John Wayne. I'm thinking of the Stanley Kubrick's interview about 2001 is one that we were assigned to read in a film class. It seems like a Playboy interview is a little bit different.
Well, yeah. I mean, first of all, the Playboy interview was long.
Yeah.
You spent a number of days or hours with the person. The idea was to go where nobody had gone before. I guess one way I could describe that is my very first Playboy interview was with Larry Hagman when he was J.R. Ewing.
Yeah.
And it was the summer before we found out who shot J.R.
Wow.
Okay, so I went to Dallas and hung out with Larry for 2 weeks. Okay. And
2 weeks.
yeah, I mean,
wow.
I had a hotel room and I would hang out. I'd go to the set. I went to his house. One day he said, okay, we're going to get in the pool and stand at the shallow end. I said, don't have a bathing suit, Larry. He goes, oh, neither do I. And the champagne glasses on the decking,
right,
and the tape recorder. And so that's where we did the part of the interview. And then part of the interview was when we were driving around in his Mercedes doing circles in an empty parking lot. It was great. I mean, it was long. And
yeah.
And when per what I was saying before, after about 4 hours, he'd said everything that he'd said to everybody else. So finally, for some reason, he told me, well, when I was playing Major Nelson on I Dream of Jeannie, I was taking LSD. So I was really in outer space.
And he had not revealed that to anybody else?
No.
Yeah.
Maybe
because that was the thing that I remember about Hagman, him talking about acid.
Yeah. So, and it went from there. So I did a lot of those. And the idea was to, I spent 17 hours straight with Shirley MacLaine in her New York apartment. Okay. And talking. Then we went to see a movie, The Big Chill. And we never said a word while we were in the movie theater. But, you just get all that stuff and then you find a beginning and you find an end and then you interweave everything. So it's like a real conversation made from real stuff. It's like one of those Chinese finger puzzles. It's got an interior structure. So things suggest the next thing.
Right.
As opposed to just, And then, we used to go in Playboy interviews. There's always a moment where you go, they say the subject says something and you go, oh, come on. Oh, come on.
Right.
Or we would say boxer shorts or, briefs or what. It was just fun.
Were there contentious times? I mean, do you have memories of certain celebrities who were just kind of like at some point didn't like the questions you were asking or didn't like the story you wrote?
Well, I didn't. Well, first of all, in the interviews, I never wrote a story. It was just Q&A. But my method was always to say, look, well, you go in and you start, first thing you talk, and then you jump around and there, you got a question on page 1 and page 10 and their answer, it jumps around. But I would say, look, I'm going to ask you whatever I want. Pause. If you don't want to answer it, tell me.
Right.
Pause. But I may ask you, try to convince you to do it. Pause. But you don't have to. And we can talk about it. I just did not, want to be sitting there with some forbidden, topic.
Right.
People would interview Tom Cruise and the publicist would say, you can't ask about Scientology. I interviewed him 4 times. This is prior to Scientology. But, he was, all these people were I don't know what it is about me, and I've heard this, people talk to me.
There's a moment in your book, All for a Few Perfect Waves, which is the one that you gave me a few weeks ago, maybe a few months ago. And I just finished it, and I can't say enough about it. I want to do a whole episode about Miki, Dora and the things that are in that book. But one of the things that's a delight about the book, honestly, is the sort of methodological stuff where you're literally talking about what it's like to track this guy down, or what it's like to try to interview someone who is an enigmatic figure. And it seems like Miki, Dora is emblematic of a lot of celebrities who like have an image that they want to project. And it's sort of like, it seems like you're right, I think, to identify your sort of personality as the key to unlocking that, because it's hard.
Yeah, I mean, I spoke to Miki Dora in 1983.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't because I was charming. It was because we'd been going, I'd called his father, and his father says, well, I don't really talk to my son much these days, but this is 83, but I'll tell him. So he told Miki that I wanted to talk to him for this story for California Magazine. And Miki called a friend of his, a woman named Cynthia Applewhite, and asked her to meet with me. So we met for 4 months, negotiating back and forth. And, very nicely, I made friends with Cynthia, which would be an interesting story too. And eventually she said, Miki wants to meet you. And he basically, in this interview, was going, well, what's the advantage of talking to you and revealing this stuff? And, was canny and, he would say stuff, but I'm not cowed by these people. I mean, I'm not arrogant, but I just said, at one point I said, Miki, you're being paranoid.
Yeah.
And he laughed because he knew I was piercing the veil. And, but other people, it's, you got to be.
Dora as a figure depends on a lot of bullshit in a lot of ways. And if you call him out on it, it seems like he actually is almost like a bear in a way, in the sense that like you can scare a bear off really quickly just by making a loud noise. And it seems like Miki, Dora, when you call him out and say, you're being a paranoid asshole here, you're like, oh, okay, I'm sorry. It's kind of amazing to see how easily cowed he is, honestly.
I will say, though, that I didn't call him an asshole, and he didn't say he was sorry. He just laughed.
Yeah.
It was fine. I got what I needed from him, and I wrote a story that he hated and loved and carried around with him and showed and talked about, depending on how he felt at the moment, with a lot of people. And a lot of people in the surf world loved the story because they didn't know anything about Miki either.
Yeah.
And I was only scratching the surface. So
I knew very little about the figure of Miki, Dora at all. He's only someone who I remember being mentioned in surf documentaries that I've seen, especially Riding Giants, with a Stacy Peralta movie, which is something you mention a lot in the book.
Yeah, I talked to Stacy.
Yeah. And I love that. I was waiting for that, actually, because Peralta seems like he's a real like pop chronicler of this kind of stuff.
I will interject and give Stacy credit for when I talked about how I was going to approach the book and voices. He said, write some interstitial material between the voices, and I did, and it worked out because that's historical catching up, setting the scene.
It's crazy how smart Peralta is. And I don't mean that to be like insulting. Like, how does a skateboarder figure all this stuff out? Because Dogtown and Z-Boys honestly like stunned me with the kind of conclusions they draw in that movie, beyond just, oh, look, check out these guys that did some cool skateboarding shit. I mean, I used that movie in classes to talk about the history of California, the history of capitalism, the history of architecture. I mean, it just touches on so much stuff. And he seems, reading his interview that you put in the book, it seems like he's aware of all that.
Well, you're much smarter than me. You see all this kind of stuff that I don't. I see it later.
Yeah.
I just ask what I'm interested in. I mean, there's certain things you have to cover. You just have what you have to cover. But, people talk to me, and it's not because I shuffle and I'm, with my head down like, please, or anything. It works for some people. I don't know. It was just great to be able to do something like a Playboy interview. Even though it came out monthly, it didn't have the feel of a story that you write and then the next week it's wrapping fish somewhere,
Right.
And that's why I went to books, because books not only paid better, but the opportunity presented itself, and they are long projects, you know.
Yeah, books. It seems like a book is like an extension in terms of just the economics of it. A book is an extension of a long magazine assignment that you get paid for 2 weeks to go hang out with Larry Hagman. That's the kind of stuff that this generation of writers idolizes, I think. 'Cause it doesn't seem like there's very many people that get that anymore.
Well, I mean, you used to be, there's always been press agents, but for a while, and maybe now, because I'm not really in it, I call them suppress agents.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, I mean, I've done Playboy interviews, if I can remember, that were short. I think I got the shortest one I ever had to do was Crocodile Dundee, Paul
Hogan.
Hogan.
Wow, I forgot about that guy.
I got 4 hours with him.
Is he still alive?
Yeah, I think
Gotta
so.
be somewhere.
Yeah, I had 4 hours with him in a studio in New York.
Oof.
You know?
Yeah.
But, Jerry Seinfeld. You just, the point is, the thing I would always say, because there's now I digress. I remember doing Lorne Michaels, right? So, I know he expected to be asked about Saturday Night Live, right, immediately. But I didn't. The first session, I just would not talk about it. I would only talk about his history in Canada, And then I always would say, and usually it was true, is to anybody, I would say, I listened to the tapes, and we are doing a great thing here. We are making great. So
Yeah.
I'm inclusive.
I love that. Yeah.
Making, we were, and they would get into it because they realized, it was not just a quick hit. Also, people have a tendency to have in their head something that they're afraid of, that they don't want to talk about, but they never talk about it. But when they actually, the words come out of their mouth, it doesn't sound as bad as they imagined.
Yeah.
So, and I, when it came to books, I would always say, look, I'm writing the book with you. I'm working for you or the publisher. You have the final decision. Just tell me everything. And I'll put it together.
Let the chips fall where they may.
Well, and they get to read their books.
Sure.
And you hope that they read their books. But with me, I never just went off and wrote their book. It was a 50-50 thing. And they read it and they go, well, I maybe take this out or this, I always give them, they have the opportunity. I remember interviewing Tom Cruise for Playboy. And I said, if you have anything you want to change in this, let me know. So I think I was interviewing Diane Lane in New York. And he called me and he said, would you take out the word fuck? Because I don't want my mother to see that.
Wow.
And I said, okay, sure.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's interesting.
it's all about relationships and about how you hit it off. I mean, if you hit it off, it's great. And you develop a relationship. And, I want things to be good. I don't want to take up time just to bask in the glory of star power. I've had to tell publicists, you want to just give me an hour with this person? I need an hour and a half. I need 2 actually, but I'll do it in an hour and a half. You want a good story about your client, right?
Is that because the more time you have, the more likely you are to get past all the bullshit and get to something that's like a nugget of something real that you're going to show an angle on this person that no one else is going to show? It seems like, I'd say that because like these podcasts that go on, and this one won't go on 3 hours. That's my promise to you. But some podcasts go on for 3 hours with the philosophy that like after hour 2, when we're all spent in saying all the shit that we always say, we'll eventually start saying something real.
I wouldn't wait 2 hours.
That's a long time.
It is. You get tired.
Yeah, I mean, I don't do 3 hour podcasts. Like I do basically 45 minutes or an hour because I'm trying to sort of think ahead of time of the major points I want to hit. If that makes sense.
Right, exactly. And look, I was part of this culture at a time in our generational history for boomers when we had the best music, the best sex, the best drugs, the best of everything. And we hoped it would go on forever, but it was just sort of a lucky accident post World War II, when, our parents made a good life for us.
Yeah.
and we didn't have to worry about putting bread on the table, food on the table until we moved out. Then we had to worry about it. But
do you think that's part of the counterculture kind of thing in the 60s? Is the kind of the strong economy? It seems like it connects.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. There's an irony to that, it seems like.
Right. I mean, when you have your basic needs met, you can spend a lot of time thinking about changing the world.
That's funny.
And you try.
Yeah.
In some ways, and I don't believe in one generation blaming another generation. Now it's okay, boomer.
I hate that.
But it'll be something. Those people will get it from their younger generation.
Just wait for okay, millennial. It's coming.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
Okay, zoomer. Yep.
Right. Okay, zoomer sounds pretty good.
I know. I like okay, zoomer.
So.
Yeah, I hate that generational shit, honestly, and that's partly why I cringe at as much as I'm looking at my bookshelves here of 1960s and 70s books written by people who were there. That sort of thing. I do cringe at a lot of the romantic nostalgia about that age and that generation it went through. But at the same time, it's clear that a lot of people felt that way. A lot of people felt during that moment that they were part of a generation that was going to change the world.
Right. I mean, music was our common language.
Mm-hmm.
I guess. And
were you at Woodstock?
No, I was actually, while Woodstock was going on, my then girlfriend and I were riding in my 1962 VW panel bus through Yosemite on a 2-week vacation, right? Just riding around all the way up California and then over to San Francisco and stuff like that. And Woodstock was going on at the same time. But, I saw the movie.
Speaking of Scorsese, right?
Yeah, and I know some people I knew some people in the movie. I mean, I don't remember who now, but probably interviewed a bunch of them.
One of my favorite moments in, I don't know, one of the Mark Maron interviews or something is someone who was at Woodstock was saying that, was emphasizing that the moment where Jimi Hendrix did the national anthem was which is so iconic in so many of those documentaries and memories. They're like, everyone was asleep. Jimmy came on at 6 a.m.
Right.
The sun was coming up. There was nobody listening to that. And there's there's another irony there of this iconic moment that this person was saying, I was there and nobody saw it. Everyone had basically gone to sleep during the 4-hour Grateful Dead set.
It's really funny that you say that because if my memory serves, I was in San Francisco. It was February 10th or 7th, 1970. A friend of mine was going to UC Santa Cruz. We went to, I think it was the Fillmore or Winterland. Mm-hmm. Went to see the Hendrix. The bill was the Grateful Dead, Hendrix, and Mayall maybe. I'm not for sure. But they played twice, and I remember falling asleep during the Grateful Dead.
Yeah, who couldn't?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, not to say, you ever seen the movie about the train across Canada?
No.
With the Grateful Dead playing and the band and all these, Janice and Joni, they're all on the train and they're playing. It was a great movie.
I've never seen that. I've
documentary.
I've never really been that much of a Dead music person. There are a couple things I like about, but the iconography, the Jerry as a figure, all of that stuff is important to me for some reason, but the music is the number one thing, I guess.
Yeah, there's good stuff. I mean, whatever. It's not the stuff it wasn't like Neil Young, okay?
Yeah. Neil's my guy, as everyone knows. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
So tell your Neil Young stories. When did you encounter Neil Young? Because you showed me a picture of you and Neil hanging out, and I was like, that was part of my mythology about David Rensin. Is this guy has met everybody.
My friend Cameron is the one who got to interview Neil for Rolling Stone and became friends and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I've always liked Neil Young. I saw him in the Buffalo Springfield. I saw him at the Hollywood Bowl, I think, and they might have been on the bill with the Rolling Stones. I can't remember. It's a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I was like Neil, and I remember peeing in the urinal next to him in the Troubadour, and looking over. Oh, it's Neil, and it's me. Okay, great. And and I remember going up to San Luis Obispo State or SO. Yeah, I don't know. They were giving, I don't know, we're all on a bus going up there. They were giving a buffalo or a bison to the school. I don't know.
Wow.
And I remember I think the picture I may have shown you was just me and Neil and Neil's late manager, Elliot Roberts. We were all sort of laughing this picture, but Elliot said, "Hey, can you give us a ride home?" So it was me driving in my Datsun 510, Elliot at the front seat, Neil in the back driving to, Bel Air. And then I went to Elliot's funeral and got a nice hug from Neil for being there. But, he doesn't know me from Jack,
Yeah.
But that's okay.
Still, to encounter all these people is just kind of incredible. I'm wondering, did you encounter the other Titan writers of that era? I think of like Hunter S. Thompson or Norman Mailer. Those are people that I think of as like the big macho writers of that era.
I'm sure I did. I mean, Hunter Thompson once called me once because I had done actually written a story for Playboy on the adult film industry in 1979 and 80. I had my remit was to go out and find out about, snuff films, child porn, kiddie porn, mob, and that was one part. And then the other part was adult films. So I did all that. And then the Playboy did not run the controversial stuff. It was just sort of like, hey, guess what? You put a VHS in your player, and it's mom and dad are watching a porn film. And I spent a lot of time in the industry, and I talked to actors and actresses and producers and directors. And
this is like the whole Boogie Nights transition from
film to video.
It
was actually Boogie Nights.
Yeah.
Which I talked to Paul Thomas Anderson about once because I interviewed him, and he got it right. And in fact, a woman I made friends with who was an actress was in his movie, but playing a judge.
That's funny.
A great gal. So, yeah, so I did that. And so Hunter Thompson called me up and wanted to know all about that because he was going to do something on it. That's about it. Yeah. I probably have a tape somewhere of me talking to Hunter Thompson.
Yeah.
Trying to hold my own.
And Norman Mailer?
No. All I remember is this is my rifle, this is my gun, this is for fighting, this is for fun.
Yep. The character that I think of when I think of Miki Dora, the whole time I was reading it, and I don't know if the name ever came up actually, but who he reminded me of the most was Neil Cassidy. And I don't know if you would agree with that, but it seemed like there are so many characters like Miki Dora or Neil Cassidy that are sort of the feral, weird, not ready for primetime guys that end up inspiring the other people that become really popular and well known. And that's what I mean.
I don't know. And I know obviously who Neil Cassidy is, but I don't know really as much about him. I mean, Miki was wild, but Miki was also urbane. He was sophisticated. He believed in fine dining and first class travel.
That's really funny, by the way, about that whole thing, about him pretending poverty his whole life.
Right.
And finding out he had $500,000 in the bank in stocks and bonds in every major corporation.
I looked at all those papers.
You can tell in the photos that you have throughout the book, and this book, by the way, I want to mention again, is All for a Few Perfect Waves, David Rensin. Go pick this book up if you're interested in like the 20th century man. And it's sort of like, I don't know, I was thinking about Jackass a lot, weirdly enough, Johnny Knoxville, and it's sort of like surf, skate culture. This book convinced me that Miki Dora was an instrumental archetypal figure in sort of crafting that image.
I don't remember, it was Derek Hind in the book said that there was nobody, Miki was not in the mold of people. They were in the mold of Miki.
Yeah.
He was, I mean, to some people he was just a grifter and a con artist and who could be charming, who didn't want you to sell him out by talking about him because, he traveled on his good name or on the, people would say, yeah, Miki ripped me off. Oh, that's so great. I feel like I'm part of a club. But Miki was, really, addicted to the sensation of surfing and was also, I mean, it's complex. You just can't boil it down to one thing. It takes a whole book to try to explain. And when you see all the different facets that he revealed, but he it was his church surfing.
Yeah.
He grew up, with his mother and father divorced. And, then his mother remarried a hard-ass, somewhat anti-Semitic surfer named Garth Chapin. Mickey had to deal with that. And then, he didn't like to be hassled. I mean, listen, Mickey's stepfather made him get circumcised at the age of 12. Can you imagine that?
Good Lord.
And so he just wanted to do what he wanted to do. I got to say, Mickey was slightly inspiring to me as well.
Yeah.
My favorite surfer of the era was Mike Doyle, but you couldn't miss Mickey Dora. Fortunately, they had the same initials, so I was safe. He, I don't know. He was just, to me, contained all the classic elements of myth, and mythology.
Totally. And like, I was just drawn so into this book from the beginning because of the depiction of an era that you don't really see discussed in a lot of histories of surfing, which is the like kind of pre-Gidget era. What crazy people were doing on the beaches of Los Angeles in like the 1930s and 40s, and how World War II like interrupted that, and then like all these veterans come back and they just like surf, and they're like just dudes that are like have a lot of mechanical knowledge. They're all kind of, the world is half bohemian, but there's no such thing as hippies yet, so they're all kind of like lounging around the beach. There's a lot of booze, a lot of music. It's just an incredible
They
scene.
They also had jobs. Mickey didn't want to work.
They're working class people.
Right, exactly. And then Gidget, through no fault of her own, Kathy Kohner, who I know was in the book as well. They're all in the book. That's the thing. There's 300 people in the book.
Yeah.
Her father writes, Gidget, and it becomes a movie, and all of a sudden everybody floods the beaches, Malibu. And Mickey's going, what the fuck? I can't take off on a wave without running into some idiot, who doesn't know how to surf. I never, if I went to Malibu maybe once or twice, but I stayed away. I surfed, from 64 to like early 70s, and I was really a bad surfer. I mean, I'm blind, and I could see closeout waves coming. So, but at least I knew what was going on.
I've never really surfed at all. I spent a lot of time on a boogie board when I was young, and all the way through like high school, with the beach a lot. But I've still been obsessed with surfing my whole life. It's just part of the culture here and part of the identity, and it's just that's the way it works.
Right. Right. Exactly.
It's like being a sports fan, kind of.
Yeah. I mean, I read all the magazines. I read all the interviews. I knew what was going on at the time. I can't keep up with it now, And, Mickey would do some interviews for these magazines, which he essentially wrote himself or had someone help him write. And he was apocalyptic and caustic and cynical. And basically a lot of his, predictions came true.
It's really crazy that he dies like right after 9/11, and that in the book, he's seeing, not to give anything away, but Mickey Dora dies like in
2002.
Okay. And he sees 9/11 happen like as has cancer, and he knows that like it's kind of the end for him. There's an irony to that too, because it's like he's sort of, and his comments are like, "This is it." It's comments that a lot of people had, were like, "Here it is, end of the world." But it almost like he went to his grave almost in the midst of the war on terror and the confirmation that it was all coming apart.
Well, Mickey had a habit of saying, "This is it."
Yes,
and it was never it.
You could say that if you were in the late 20th century, you could say that any day and be plausible.
Right. Yeah, I mean, he was, I don't know. I found him fascinating. And the thing is, I did not want... Mickey's legend depends on mystique and not knowing the truth.
Yeah.
So I think when I gather 300 voices, you get some truth for sure. But I did not have any desire to solve the mystery of Mickey Dora.
No, that would be silly.
Because
there's no answer to this guy.
Well, right.
There's no answer to any of us.
A lot of people would like to solve that. Some writers would, I suppose. But my approach was, I'm going to allow him to retain the dignity of mystique. But here's all the stories, and you decide. You're the reader. I believe in readers should decide.
Yeah.
And I've gotten, people reacting to that book like, I was a lifeguard and he was a scumbag, to I really admired him.
Yeah. So At what point did you realize that the book was going to be largely oral history? Because it seems like, and again, I read a lot of memoirs and biographies, and I love life stories. It seems like the oral history.
Always oral history.
Yeah.
As is my other book that's oral history is The Mailroom, Hollywood history from the bottom up. But the sort of boring story is that I wrote a story for Rolling Stone about Earth, Wind, and Fire. And my editor there said, yeah, this is really good, except, you can't have 2 sentences describing something and then 3 different quotes following it. It's going to be the other way around. You have the lengthy thing where you talk about and have a supporting quote. Well, I realized then that what I like is voices.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have to be responsible for describing something correctly or incorrectly, or resort to, he was as tall and skinny as his home in San Francisco. I don't have to do that. I do have to be the documentarian and make the choices about what I put in and when and how it flows, and the highs and lows, and as if it was a sine wave.
Oh yeah, I mean, this book has a narrative thrust, and I feel like I'm on an adventure, honestly.
Right.
And at some point, I kind of like, it's weird because this is a product of, I've read a lot of books that are like collected oral histories like this. You sort of read it, and it's sort of, you kind of forget who's talking, and you sort of are just reading it like you're reading a novel, and all these voices sort of combine in some way to give a really dynamic portrait, honestly.
I've read oral histories. There's many that I like, and there are bad ones too, but you really have to give it a narrative arc. Mm-hmm. It has to have, it just has to have the forward momentum.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're not just reading it for the information.
Right.
So it was always oral history. And as I said, Stacy Peralta convinced me to actually write some of the narrative to connect things. And he was right. So I don't know. That's the thing I like to do. I was good at voices. That's what I do. My other books that I've done, if you mind if I say them.
Please plug away.
I helped write 2 books with Tim Allen, one with Chris Rock, one with Gary Shandling, 2 with Louis Zamperini, the hero of Unbroken, one with a sex therapist, one with a super manager, 2 in Hollywood, Bernie Brillstein, who used to manage everybody from the Muppets, Jim Henson, all the way to Lorne Michaels and Saturday Night Live cast. I mean, he was a great guy. He was like my mentor. Mm. I mean, all these books are their voices. It's not about them. It's in their voices. And you have to know how to do that, or instinctively at least. Some people have like sayings or things they do, like Bernie would say, you tell me a story and he goes, I swear, kid, I swear it's the truth. It's the truth. So, there are times when he's talking, I'll throw that in. And Bernie said to me, well, I really liked the book. I knew the entire story before it happened, before I read it, but I still was interested, and you made me sound like me.
Made me sound like me. Yeah. I love that. I mean, some of the best books I've read that are by memoirs that are written by the person with someone, and there's so many of those. It feels like that's a really tricky task, is to be like, I'm going to write your autobiography essentially and try to capture your voice. I think that's the Miles Davis book, which is his autobiography is famous because it's just so raw, and the writer captured Miles' like really rough voice, and it makes the whole thing so strong.
Well, look at the Keith Richards book.
It's right there.
It's a great book.
Yeah,
now,
one of my favorites.
You can tell there's a spot in there where you can tell that the writer is writing it, but he obviously had to type Keith's words and do stuff, and Keith apparently wrote some of it. So, but I always have fought against the easy idea that ghostwriters make these things invalid. They're just cutting off the highs and they're cutting off the lows. They don't want any.
No, I think it's actually necessary for someone rather than writing it themselves. You might get a better picture of someone from a ghostwriter.
Well, yeah, I mean, or a collaborator, or co-author is my favorite.
There you go.
But I mean, the fact is that Tim Allen is not a book writer.
Right.
I'm the book writer. they know what they're doing. I know what I'm doing.
It's so funny you wrote a book with Tim Allen, of all
Two.
people.
My
Two.
first, yeah.
When did you get into the comedian things? Is it Tim
In
Allen?
the beginning.
Chris Rock, Gary Shandling? You've always been a comedian person?
Well, that's, at the time, it just happened that way.
I've got
I wrote
Carlin's book up there somewhere. I've got Doug Stanhope's book. I've got a lot of
Carlin's
comics
book
books.
was, shepherded through the process by his editor, Lori Apkemeyer at Hyperion. And, she's great. She's a good friend of mine. And now I've lost my train of thought, but
Comedians.
Oh, comedians.
Why comics?
The very first book I ever did was called The Bob Book, a humorous sociology of men named Bob. I co-authored it with my friend, the late, great Bill Zamey, who's written, wrote a number of books about Andy Kaufman, about Regis Philbin, about Jay Leno. There's more, and died before he could finish his book on Johnny Carson. But I had noticed that the name Bob was everywhere. And even including the fact that when my wife and I were driving home from Sacramento, we pulled off the highway to get a bite to eat and looked up and there was a sign that said Schmorga Bob's. And I thought, Schmorga and Bob's get together, this is a sign. And I talked to Bill, and Bill says, well, my dad is a Bob. So we developed the Bob survey, and we wrote, and we got just about every famous Bob to fill out the Bob survey, except even Dylan did it a question. Other singer dancer Bobs were a little uncomfortable, but we got Hope, we got everybody.
Wow.
So, and then there was sort of secondary Bobs, and then we wrote great chapters, and we wrote a chapter about bad Bobs. There's very few bad Bobs, or the difference between Bob and Rob and Robbie and Bobby.
Sure.
I got a nice picture, headshot autographed by Robert Redford, said just another Bob.
That's great.
But
so people knew that this was a thing.
And this book actually made us money, so it was good.
So funny.
So
is it in the late 60s, or when is this?
No, this is 1991.
91.
It's like Bob. It's backwards and forwards. It's
Golden age of humor books, I feel like.
Well, that's what the answer to your question.
Yeah.
Golden age. When I interviewed Seinfeld for Playboy, he was doing sign language.
Yep. I read that book 1,000 times.
He's thinking, and I said, he was like, what are you going to call it? It wasn't sign language yet, but I said, why don't you call it Master of My Own Domain, But fortunately, they called it sign language. So, every comedian wanted to cash in. Well, Tim Allen had the #1 TV show before, Seinfeld. And a friend of mine was offered Tim Allen's book. Didn't know it was about Tim Allen, but it was somebody from Hyperion, which was owned by ABC, which is owned by Disney. And he said, I don't have the time. Why don't you call David? So I talked to them and I said, all they said was a comedian. I said, well, ABC, they have 2 comedians, Tim Allen and Sinbad.
Yeah.
Well, I had just interviewed Tim Allen for Playboy. So I sent him my clips and Tim liked them. There we go. And it was a #1 book.
I read this one too. Don't stand too close to a naked man.
My title, yes.
Yeah, really.
Yes, don't stand too. Well,
what a funny connection. I was like really young when I was reading this stuff, and like I came of age. I said it's funny you said 91 because it made me realize, that really was. That was
94, yeah.
Yeah, the 90s. There were so many books by comedians. There were so many humor books that were about like little stuff like the Bob thing so many. Life's Little Destruction book I had was one of them. There were a billion of them, and I loved that genre.
Right.
And it seemed like it was just a cash cow at that moment.
Well, it was. And, Tim got a bunch of money. I did Jeff Foxworthy. I didn't mention that. Jeff Foxworthy.
Jeff Foxworthy, too.
I did his redneck book sold more than the autobiography, but it was good.
He was giant. He must have made $1 billion in the 90s.
Yeah. He's a great guy. Extremely funny. I had a good time with him.
That's funny.
And, but Tim, he #1 book, #1 movie, Santa Claus, and #1 TV show all at the same time in the Christmas of '94. Wow. So we made a bunch of money. My portion was good enough for me, and my career's been downhill since there.
Are you serious? So like Tim Allen is like the apex of the economic ride of being a writer. I mean, I say that because it's like it makes sense in the whole like larger story of print culture in America. And we're talking about the last, like, this is before the internet. Of course people are going to Barnes & Noble and buying stupid books that have humor in them, because it's kind of like jokes that are passed around on the internet now as memes.
Right.
People used to actually pay for this stuff in books.
Right.
Not so much after the internet comes.
No.
I mean, one of the first things that came with the internet, for those that don't remember, there are people listening to the show that are even younger, that might not remember that, like, in the 90s, once the internet started happening, the first thing people were passing around is jokes and stuff like that, humor on email and everything else, humorous websites, really stupid stuff. But it replaced this. It replaced this sort of reality.
My son wrote a book in 2009 when he was a freshman at U Chicago with his roommate, and they collaborated on a book called Twitterature. And Twitterature was taking the great classic, books, some movies, some other stuff, and telling their stories in 20 tweets or fewer. So all 7 Harry Potter books in 20 tweets or fewer. It was very funny, a little dirty, but they wouldn't put any of it online. Because they said, there are a couple things online, but who's going to buy it if they can get it all online for free?
Right.
But a lot of some people would have like things online, and they would have 500,000 followers, reading that material. And so a publisher would say, 500,000 followers, this sounds a good deal. So they'd make a deal with these people because the amount of followers they could, when a book failed, they could cover their ass. Well, they had a lot of followers. But they already got the material. So
exactly. That's the thing. It's like there are so many influencers, we'll call them. That's a new category of person, but in media, that have like millions of followers, and it's unclear exactly how they monetize that. Like, how do you turn that into money? Because followers are just people that are looking at your stuff for free.
Well, it's the companies that they influence on behalf of say, you got 1 million followers, here's a check for such and such. It's based on the size.
It's just advertising.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's just a different word for advertorial,
But it's sort of it makes you think of Mickey Dora, right? A guy who very much represents the, like, I'm staying pure, I'm never selling out, you'll never see me doing an advertisement, that sort of thing.
But he did.
He did with his
cat,
Quicksilver and the
Quicksilver,
surfboards.
Yeah, he and Greg Knoll partnered on a board named after Mickey's nickname, D.A. Cat.
Right.
The Cat. And it was an interesting board, and they did 3 years, I think, or 4 years of it. But he would make these incredible ads that would appear in
They're so genre. Cool. And you have them in the book.
I have some of them in the book, and they're just really brilliant.
Even the Cat sells out and gets money from advertising.
Right. But he sold out, but in a way that didn't trap him into being a sellout.
Well, it doesn't seem like it matters, right? Like, does it really matter anymore if you're a sellout or not? Like, it's kind of like, I don't know. You look back at like Kurt Cobain as a figure. That was my generation's guy, right? And like Kurt Cobain as a figure was like, very much, attacking corporate America and like that sort of idea, and was a very subversive figure. He was also like a major label musician, and like no one seems to bother with
people
that.
are always going, I don't remember the quote exactly, and I've looked for it, but Albert Brooks once said something about, don't worry about, whether you're selling out or not, or what people think, because they're not thinking about you. Just do it,
Yeah.
Now, I mean, you can sell out in a way that is distasteful and makes people, want to retch.
Crass,
retch.
Yeah.
But there's, look, I think America loves a rebel. They love them only after they've hated them for 20 years. Then because they've lasted 20 years, now, well, I guess something's going on. We love them because they're, they lasted.
Yeah.
So, Mickey did that, and Mickey lived on the largesse of Quicksilver and was just sort of a presence in Europe at functions, but didn't really do
That's
it.
what I was going to say earlier that about the pictures that you share of Mickey Dora in this book. He looks like a rich guy to me. Like in all the photos, I'm like, this guy looks like a rich Hollywood guy. He's good looking. He's always got a sharp suit on. People say like he's always got his hair slicked back. He looks great. And those last photos, the Vogue photos that you share, they're very striking at the end to see, because so many of the photos are sort of these photos of like, it's like taking a picture of Sasquatch over the years to get a photo of Mickey Dora.
Right.
It's blurry. It's like hard to get him. But these really clear, crisp portraits that Vogue, a photographer, took of him.
It was Vogue, French Vogue.
Okay, French Vogue as he was dying, I guess.
The photographer's Taki Biblias.
He looks amazing.
It's an amazing shot. And I'm grateful to Taki for allowing me to have those photos.
He looks like I showed him to Claudia, my wife. She was like, he looks like an old Hollywood star. And I'm like, yeah, 100%. There's something, right. I mean, there's something to him in that as well, like how handsome he was.
And he grew up as a kid with his father owning a restaurant on Sunset Strip near the Whiskey called the Little Gypsy. Well, that was the second. Was the
It's like a Hungarian restaurant,
Hungarian
right?
restaurant, because Miklos Sr. was a Hungarian, and Miki, you know, one of his play pals was Errol Flynn.
Yeah.
You know, and Miklos had all the expatriate directors and actors from Europe during, you know, the war. So
it's an incredible story, and I'll let you go because we could talk endlessly, and maybe you can come back. I'd love to talk about the Valley with you because I have a lot of questions about what the Valley was like and is like. But I just want to say the name of it again, All for a Few Perfect Waves. You know, it may have been the apex of your sort of journalistic career to be writing books with Tim Allen in the 90s, but I don't know. I think of this as your magnum opus. And it's the only book I've actually, it's not the only book I've read of yours because I've read the Tim Allen book when I was in high school. But do you think of this book as a particularly like an anchor of your work? Because it does seem like a really important one.
Yeah, I think that and The Mailroom and a couple other ones, you know, are. I don't know. I've been lucky. I've done more than I ever expected to do. I managed to follow my dream on some things. And I'm proud of that book. Oh, and about the Valley,
we're starting part 2 here.
I just want to say quickly that I'll leave you with an image. When I graduated from high school, my grandfather gave me some money, and I got a used GTO, red GTO, 65 GTO, the best year, and
the Tiger.
And my dad made some spacers, so we raised the back up a little bit so you could see the differential, which we painted white, and painted AMF on there. And we went cruising, and AMF meant adios, motherfucker.
And that's the tough guy Valley Pontiac GTO 1965 culture. I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you, David. We'll talk to you again.
Thanks for having me.
Well, okay, folks. I think that's going to do it for Nostalgia Trap this week. I want to thank my guest, David Rensin, for literally coming over to my house and sitting in this office. It was kind of bizarre to finish a big New York Times best-selling book and then have the guy who wrote it sitting down in the chair I was reading it in just the night before. A great experience, and I hope there are many more in the future. So thank you, David Rensin. And I want to thank everyone who is checking out the News Trap episodes that I'm putting up daily on the Nostalgia Trap Patreon page. I'm sort of sharing in a different way over there. It's a little scary because they're just sort of like spontaneous reactions to the news. I'm probably often sounding crazy and maybe wrong, but I don't know. I feel like I need to share it anyway because that's just my natural need to get that out. And it makes me feel a little vulnerable. And so I just wanted to thank the people who are actually listening and giving me the grace to, giving me the space to experiment a little over there. And again, if you're not a Patreon subscriber, why not? You're already listening to Nostalgia Trap. Come on over. The link is in the episode description. Thanks so much. We'll see you again very soon. Bye-bye.